thank you. As we mentioned all morning, the race for the White House still way too close to call. Nevada is among several states where ballots are still being counted.
Yeah, Joe St. George joining us now live from Washington with more on how things went across the country on election night. Good morning, Joe. First, though, I want to ask you, can you, from your vantage point there, see or hear protests or demonstrations going on in our nation's capital?
No, it feels pretty calm where we're at, although we're at the U.S. Capitol building, closer to the grounds where a lot of the disruptions have been. It's been a little bit closer to the White House. But overall, I can tell you, as someone who was up live reporting all night, most of this town was boarded up in Washington, D.C., and the protests did not escalate to the point where some people thought it could. So somewhat peaceful, although there certainly were plenty of marches and demonstrations here in D.C.
Now, Joe, your story yesterday said a tie would be the most 2020 thing to happen. And as we know, the race is very, very tight right now. Overnight, the president said he's going to take this to the Supreme Court. Now, if he does do that, what would those steps be?
Well, look, I mean, at this hour, it's about Nevada, it's about Pennsylvania, it's about Michigan and Wisconsin. And if you're a Democrat waking up, you're feeling optimistic about Wisconsin at this hour, and you think that you may be able to pull out a victory in Nevada. Nevada is very close, and it's significant because if Donald Trump, President Trump, is able to flip Nevada, suddenly Michigan, he can afford to lose. There's a scenario. So keep that in mind to everyone waking up in Vegas. But you mentioned the possibility of legal challenges. That is certainly the case. There are a lot of Republicans in this town, a lot of members of President Trump's campaign. They don't like the idea that this thing could go on for several days, that ballots that are currently in mail processing facilities could still be counted. So there will likely be lawsuits and there will be challenges. It could make its way up to the Supreme Court. But as of now, election officials have one job today: count as many votes as possible.
Joe, we know that D.C. is not a state, but we also saw that the voters there were 95% Democratic when they voted yesterday. Isn't it kind of hard for Trump to continue a Republican administration in that kind of environment?
Absolutely not. President Trump did it for 4 years. This is a very liberal city, Washington, D.C. Only 4% voted him for 2016. It didn't bother him that much at all, but that is where we stand in our nation's capital. It's just the reality of American politics.
Well, Joe, this year, the Latino vote, it's been at the forefront. I want to say a record 32 million Latinos registered to vote. What were some of the main selling points for this group of voters?
Well, I think the big takeaway from this election is that Latino voters don't necessarily mean Democratic voters. We saw a lot of diversity politically amongst the Latino community in Nevada and in all across the country. There are a lot of small business owners who supported President Trump, and there's a lot of Latinos out there who don't necessarily agree with all the immigration policies of Democrats. So I think what this election taught a lot of Democrats in this city where I'm broadcasting from this morning is that Latinos are very diverse and they can vote for both parties. And President Trump, the only reason he's really keeping this competitive is because he certainly did well with Latinos in places like Florida.
Yeah. All right, Joe St. George joining us today live from Washington, D.C. Thanks for your insights. We appreciate that, Joe.
We always love having you on. Thank you.
Yeah. Today, the